Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mildra, and I will be your gaming monk for the evening. It's no secret that the 1980s were a golden era for horror, especially the slasher flick. Now, there's a myriad reasons why this is the case, and many of which have been explored in the documentary series In Search of Darkness, which I highly recommend if you're a fan of horror in general. I'll put the link to that in the description. Some might say this is an evolution of the Italian giallo scene, others might say it's representative of the time. But personally, I think the biggest contributing factor would be the viability of home video. With the rise of home video and the rental store, came with it the rise of various horror projects, great and small, some of which might not have had a prayer in theaters, or merely did alright, but became cult hits in home video. I don't need to give out examples, because the ones that did become cult hits are so ingrained in pop culture that you're already thinking of a few as I say this. I don't think it's a coincidence that both Cinemassacre and Red Letter Media have had some of their videos set up as if they're in a video store. That brings us to the anthology horror RPG known as VHS Very Horror Stories. Created by Aces Games, and full disclosure, I've interviewed Aces Games more than once, VHS is a horror project that carries the 80s horror scene on its sleeve through 3 core games, though it has since expanded to others. Bloodlust, a nod to slasher-likes such as Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween. Overplague, a nod to science fiction horror like the Alien series. And Unchained, a nod to supernatural horror like Amityville and Hellraiser. Normally I would not cover 3 games in one go, but this is a special case. I will note, in the interest of full disclosure, that I have interviewed the developers Simone Morini and Mattia Ventura on my channel multiple times, and I did back the original game on Kickstarter. As always, that will not play a factor into my assessment. With that said, how does this take on horror hold up in my tempo? Let's find out. As far as page count, Bloodlust is 173 pages, Overplague is 177, and Unchained is 185. Despite that, all 3 of them are single column and pretty easy to run through. It certainly helps that they're designed to be a series of films and not a world, which means they can be a little lighter on detail. The real star of the show, however, is the visual identity. This is something I've talked about since I covered Household, but having a consistent visual identity can work wonders for helping a game stand out. The VHS trilogy does this, clearly evoking its inspirations throughout each book. Unfortunately, none of the books have indexes, but the PDFs do have bookmarks and a hyperlinked table of contents, so it evens out. VHS technically has character creation across its books, but it's more like suggestions than anything else, given the relatively light nature of the game. Normally for this part of the review, we'd explore this using Aldine, but for reasons I'll get into later, that'd be tricky. Instead, I'll be breaking down the elements of the pre-gens. The first thing to note is that the main 4 stats, or parameters, are Strength, Agility, Mind, and Charisma. Each of these has 3 columns to them. These 3 represent the character's attributes within those parameters in 3 potential states: Calm, Fear, and Shock. I'll get to that later. Second are the traits, which are split into 2 that you can use while in the calm state, and 2 that you can use in the fear state. These are mutually exclusive. Usually. There are a few exceptions. Third is the special ability, a limited use effect that each character has. Typically, this ability can only be used once per session, but there can be exceptions. Lastly, of course, is your health and sanity. The former is self-explanatory, and the latter can determine how much mental stress you can take before going into the shock state. This shifts your parameters to the 3rd column, as well as bars you from using your special ability. On the other hand, instead of having either your calm or fear traits available, you may choose one from each. The big reason I took this approach is that the character creation proper isn't going to have a whole lot to it. A few point buys and picking certain traits, but the real issue is that of special abilities for character creation. The book does give some bullet points on what you can do and can't with special abilities, but I feel a lack of examples beyond pre-gens hurts it. This is another case of blank check design, and I maintain that kind of thing needs examples to demonstrate where the line is. This will be an issue we get into later. VHS uses a roll under 2d6 system. Typically, you roll for the 2 and shoot for the sum of those dice being equal to or lesser than the target number, the parameters being the most common use for characters. In addition, the game puts in a nod to its namesake with a rewind and fast forward mechanic. The former is a once per session reroll, while the latter allows a character to move between an additional area in one action. There's a good deal more within the books in terms of genre emulation, be it chases, getting captured, the monster's use of fear to power their abilities, or a variant of the rules for solo play. However, at its core, the game is very light on crunch. VHS is a game that's dedicated to a specific experience, and is not interested in doing anything but that experience. This is something that can be a double-edged sword, the second edge revealing itself whenever you venture off the beaten path. While there's options to customize one's films into the series, and definitely in some of the more recent expansions to the core series, I hesitate to say it's built for that. Beyond that, it's certainly designed with one-shot and beer and pretzel sessions in mind, so I'd advise caution in using it for a long-form affair. For some of you, these things might not be an issue, but I will remind everyone that some of you is not the same as all of you. I can also see some people taking the approach that this is more of a board game than an RPG. I vehemently disagree with that. What this is instead is a more episodic style of RPG, something akin to the much-referenced Monster of the Week. If anything, the "it plays more like a board game" thing is something that comes more from simulation brain rot than anything else, in my opinion. But that's another story. For me, I feel VHS gets a stamp of recommended. As a one-shot horror romp playing tribute to the monster movies of the golden age of home video, it does that exceedingly well. If you want to venture outside of the sandbox presented, that's where things can get tricky. And I'd potentially like to see an editor's room kind of expansion on this sort of thing down the road. For that matter, I think it'd be interesting to see a hack of VHS that leans into things like the first few Saw movies. You know, the good ones. Stay frosty.